Hello, welcome. I am between you and lunch, and we have 400 gigs on the video camera to kill, and we're not leaving until we filled up the hard drive. And they tell me that's a gig a minute. Go higher res. We'll be done here in 20 seconds. 4K.
Yeah, recording 4K, we'll be done. Yeah.
Well, cool. You can say hello to Carrie the Caribou there. This is a picture of Carrie not mounted on a wall board like we have in many of our other logos. Somebody mentioned that our Caribou logo sometimes looked like we chopped her head off all the time. And so we do apologize, that was not our intent. And now that Ben's here, we can start. Thanks for keeping to the schedule, Ben. So you may have seen me 10 years ago plus at WWDC, I think in 2005, talking about the Golden Triangle, talking about Open Directory, Active Directory, and everything else. Things are a little different now, and maybe being bound to AD all the time isn't exactly what you want anymore. So I apologize for what I said a while ago. I think it was valid then, but it's probably not as valid now. And so we've had a lot of people that are looking for ways to get away from at least a hard bind to Active Directory. And so we'll chat about that for a little bit and then get into NoMAD, the app, and what it can do for you. And ideally, we'll do some demonstrations that have never been seen before in public. And some jokes that have never been heard before either. All right? So wait for those. So if you remember this, right, we had the magic triangle where you'd keep MCX and Open Directory, join clients, manage MCX by group or machine. And this slide, I still love it, except for the laptop having been changed, is a slide from my WWDC presentation in 2005, complete with non-infringing Windows logo. If you didn't get that, that's a window, but not Windows trademark. So we did a lot of work with the AD plugin back then, right? AD plugin came out in 10.3 is when it started to really become functional. People got very excited. We did some really cool things with it. And then it kind of got harder over time and maybe less and less useful for a lot of people are doing. So a little bit about what AD can do, and then we'll get into NoMAD, and then maybe even a bonus demo at the end. So if I don't do it, remind me, and you'll get a bonus demo. So first of all, kind of AD functions. What are we trying to replicate? What do we use AD for? And then how we can break that down into other pieces, and then maybe not use AD all the same. Active Directory is pretty simple. I say that, at least at the surface, where it's primarily composed of LDAP and Kerberos. Right? LDAP for the actual information and Kerberos for the authentication process in there. The nice thing about this is that we can easily replicate LDAP through Open LDAP. That's what we use in NoMAD, just LDAP search calls. And then Kerberos isn't always just Kerberos because Microsoft has done some stuff to it, but we can use the actual Kerberos binaries within OS 10 to do that. So we're just using those two different technologies, those two different protocols. And then the rest of Active Directory is just a massive data store that you just got to know what to look for and what to work with, right? So that's AD in a nutshell, and a whole bunch of stuff that we don't need. Miles and miles of data in Active Directory that you'll never touch or never really care about. The big thing that most people want to get out of Active Directory is single sign-on, right? This is the concept of typing in your password once and then getting to a bunch of other resources within the network without actually having to retype that password. The magic underneath the covers for that, at least on the Mac, is Kerberos. On the PC, it can take a variety of forms, including just replaying the NT password hash and a variety of other ways that make it seem magical, but really are very offensive in some cases. So, but on the Mac, we use Kerberos for single sign-on. Active Directory has a number of things you can use for single sign-on. The big ones probably being websites and file sharing. You can kind of sort of get printers to work. We were talking about this yesterday, and then the negotiate authentication for cups is still a little bit rough, but you can get that to work. Exchange, probably not too many people actually using Kerberos for email, but it's possible. DFS shares, we'll talk about those in a little bit. And and certificate provisioning. So this is kind of the biggest stuff that people use AD for, and in specific single sign-on for some of these resources on the network. So when we're looking at, can we get away from binding to AD all the time, this is kind of the functionality that was at least our original intent of where we would go and fix. The big question kind of comes down to login window. And this is actually where a lot of the problems kind of arise with most Active Directory environments with the Mac. And by no means during this presentation or anything that I say do I mean to malign using the Active Directory plugin, because I think there are some very, very good reasons for using the Active Directory plugin. However, where the Active Directory plugin and being consistently bound to AD starts to break down is here at the login window. And in particular for mobile users. The vast majority of the Mac users out there, at least that I run across, are mobile accounts on a laptop that are less and less often even connected to the network, right? And in this case, this is where the problems come in. Login window comes on, you may not have the VPN up, you sit there, you spin, it's got to look for DNS records, it's got to look for a lot of other stuff, right? And if it can't find that, then you have a suboptimal experience, right? This is also where the Helpdesk calls come from and other issues with the AD plugin. If you're in a Ethernet environment, in a lab or something else like that, the Active Directory plugin may be absolutely everything you need. And I wouldn't suggest that you should move away from it. However, for laptops and for a lot of the creative users, the developers, other people that are using a Mac, this is where the problem really gets into. And it also makes you ask a lot of questions. Do you really care about this, right? Having a persistent directory service means you can look up user IDs and group IDs. But you're most likely not actually using those with the local system, right? Who does group membership management on the local system for files? Nobody. Most likely you only have one user on that laptop. So there's really no point of having a directory service connection all the time. Every time you do any sort of directory listing or anything else like that, it's got to hit AD and it's got to look up those UIDs and those GIDs. And that's where a lot of the complexity comes into this, right? So is there a way that we can get all the good things out of AD, the single sign-on, the password authentication, those kinds of pieces, but then leave behind a lot of this complexity at the login window and having a consistently bound directory? The answer to that is yes. So that's good, all right? And that's what we'll talk about and what NoMAD is hopefully doing. The other problem that you run into with the login window is the password cycling, right? It's annoying for the users when they change their password on a PC and then their Mac password hasn't changed, or maybe it has changed underneath them because they've been bound to AD, and now their keychain password is off, and then that really confusing, annoying dialog box comes up that nobody really knows how to answer correctly because it's got 3 buttons when you think maybe it should only have 2. Yeah, so that's the other thing that we're trying to get rid of with NoMAD and other environments that don't use the login window. And again, one of the other big things that kind of allows this to happen, when we used to be talking about the magic triangle and kind of merging Active Directory and MCX and all this other stuff, the directory service was used for policy. MCX was stored in the directory service, so you had kind of one and the same. And there was a rationale for being consistently bound because you needed that policy. Maybe the policy would change. You wanted to get it updated. Last couple of years, there's no policy in the directory anymore for the Macs. It's all done primarily through MDM, configuration profiles, or something else. So that's another reason why there's really no point in being bound to the directory all the time when you don't need that information and it's not going to change and you've got an entirely different method of getting that policy information out of the system. All right. So previously, a number of different pieces, and some of the authors of these are here in the room. The AD plugin from Apple, AD Passmon from Ben and other friends, and Ben left.
Just run away.
This is his moment in the sun. Well, no, let him go. If he doesn't want to be here, I don't want him here. Enterprise Connect from Apple, CurbMinder, ShareMounter. How many have used any of these tools? Probably a good chunk of the room, right? They're all kind of little add-ons to kind of help that AD experience be a little more user-friendly as you go through this. Some of them you had to do a little more work with. Some of them are very more targeted products on a single piece. But when we were looking at NoMAD, we were looking at how can you not be bound all the time, and how can you kind of encompass all of this functionality, and then maybe even add some more things as we go through this. So we're introducing a term, casual binding, which is the concept of you only need really authentication. You don't need a persistent directory service connection. I want single sign-on. I still want access to all my resources on the network. I want to be a full-featured network user, but I don't want to have to be hung up at the login window for a directory service or a VPN or something else to happen. And there's some awareness of being on and off the LAN. I want my user to be consistent and my user experience to be consistent, but there are things that I want to happen when I'm on the network that I might not want to happen when I'm off the network. All right, so this is the concept of casual binding, and it's what NoMAD was really designed to do. If you know what these logos are, then maybe this is fun. That's Tinder on the left and Bumble. Every time I say casual binding, people think like bad social interactions, but it's not that. All right. All right. NoMAD. That was the bad joke. We'll get better jokes as we go through. The focus group said that was better than it was. So NoMAD, the original name was NoAD for no AD, but that didn't really roll off the tongue. So we moved it to NoMAD for no more AD. Yeah. Well, all right. See? We had to find something, and then is the gentleman from Andorra here? Yeah, I tried to get nom.ad, but that's an Andorran registry, and I had to be an Andorran citizen to register in the .ad top-level domain. So instead, we ended up with nomad.menu. Most of the .menu sites are for restaurants, but since Nomad's a menu item in the top of the menu bar, I figured it worked out pretty well. So you remember it, but then you end up with a lot of other sites that is weird. But so it goes. All right, so NoMAD, no more AD. Obviously, everything you like about AD, but without the bind. So this is that casual binding environment where we get the information that we need when we need it. And primarily, that's a single sign-on ticket. That is a access to resources on the network. Maybe it's password policy, being able to change the password. We can get certificates from a WebCA, from an Active Directory Certificate Authority. A couple other things like that, and I'll show you in a little bit. Manageable via profiles and MDM, exactly as it should be, right? So that as an administrator, you can push this out through any of your MDM solutions or whatever else. And then we wanted it to be very, very simple and customizable. Sometimes those two concepts are pretty hard to get together at the same time. So what we've done, the UI itself is very simplistic. It's a menu item with only 6 or 7 things. The preferences window only have about 5 different things to enter. However, there's about 50 preference keys now that you can set as an administrator that are not ever visible to the user, at least as far as configuring them, right? So our goal is every single piece of text in the app is configurable because that window that says, hey, your network password isn't the same as your local password is a really hard one to write generically. So everybody wanted to change that, so we want to make sure that that's configurable for any system. So a lot of flexibility within it for the admin, but hopefully absolving the user from most of that. All right. So the process that we use is pretty simple and very, very similar to the Active Directory plugin. We look for SRV records for your AD domain. If we don't find those SRV records, we assume you're not on the network and we're never going to be able to contact AD. If we do find them, you're on the network, so great. Look for Kerberos tickets. If we have both tickets and records, we're authenticated or we're on the network, then we look up the user, we find their password policy, we find their email address, we find a bunch of other stuff. Effectively just pull down the whole user record from LDAP. All right? Then we can do various different things on it, act upon it. And then we find the groups for the user. It's another handy thing. Most of what we do, we write out to a plist. So if you want to write scripts that interact with an AD user based upon what groups they might be a member of, your script can actually look up the NoMAD plist and find that group membership. All right? So some of the things that people were doing with Discal in a bound environment, that you'd use Discal to look up something, hopefully we can give you all that information so that you, again, don't have to be in a bound environment, but still get the functionality that you're looking for. All right, so a little bit of a graphical representation. Again, we do the SRV lookup. We then do an LDAP search and a KNet. And if it all works, this is kind of how we start everything out. We have the ability to work in a disjointed namespace where your Kerberos domain is different from your AD domain. I believe we can work with AD over SSL for LDAP over SSL. That's something that somebody had brought up a little while ago. So we've put in some functionality for that. And there is some interest, certainly on our behalf, to make sure it works, but there's also been some interest from a few people I've talked to have a pure LDAP environment without Active Directory. So that if you are just LDAP and Kerberos, you can do some of the similar functionality. And if you have that interest, I'm interested in chatting, because I think it'd be pretty simple for us to put together. All right. Another big feature that we put in is the ability to sync your network password with your local password. So when you get this set up, changing your Active Directory password will change your local user password. Right? It's one of the things a lot of people had asked for that allows you to have 98% of what you got with being bound, but not having to be bound. And then we update file vault and all the other stuff as appropriate. I'll show you that in a little bit. NoMAD checks for things on launch. We listen for network changes. We'll fire off a script on network change if you want us to. Every 15 minutes, we check our environment to see if everything's the same as it was. And then every time you use the menu item, so if you click on the menu item, you'll actually get it updated at that time. So that was an easy way that if users were like, well, wait a minute, that's not my password expiration time, and they click on the menu, because that's what you do, it would update in the background and then automatically show them the new stuff. Right? And this gives you the menu. This is actually 1.1, so you're seeing the beginning of the secret demo that nobody else has ever seen with the file servers listed there, because that's functionality we have coming out, so you can mount and unmount shares if you want to. All right. Wow, that's a bad logo. We should fix that. We can get certificates. The reason why we kind of started writing NoMAD, we do a lot of managed services for global accounts on the Mac, and we were getting a lot of help desk tickets about the profile for AD-bound machines to get user certificates not working. Who's had that? Yeah, all right. And it's kind of a pain. You got to walk through the user through a lot of stuff. So one of the reasons why we wanted NoMAD is to be able to get certificates from a Windows CA. And then the rest of the stuff, well, to get a certificate, you had to be Kerberos authenticated. To get Kerberos authenticated, you might as well check and see if you're on the network. And then pretty soon we had an entire app based just around this that we've added on a bunch of other features too. So we can get certificates for users. That's been very handy. Like I said, there's about 50 different preference keys that you can use to do a whole bunch of stuff. With 102, which is the currently shipping version, you can't configure everything, but by the time we're done with 103, every single menu item you should be able to turn on or off if you want. So if you don't want users to be able to renew tickets, you can turn that off. If you don't want users to be able to lock the screen, you can turn that off. If you don't want users to be able to change their password, you can turn that off. Our goal, again, was to be very, very flexible with everything. You can force a local password sync. You can keep the AD password in the keychain if you want, which is what we found most users are doing. That's all in there. Keychain support, we'll store your AD password in there. If this is all set up, and it's just a couple of pref keys to do it, the user only has to enter their AD password once every 90 days. After that, NoMAD will use the password out of the keychain to re-authenticate them, and they just have single sign-on every time they want. All right? And they don't even know it's happening in the background, because as soon as NoMAD can find a directory controller, or DC, it will actually try to log in and get Kerberos tickets for them. All right? So that's the goal, that if you go in that method, I'm not that excited about keeping these passwords in the keychain, but it's the right place to put them if you're going to do it. The user doesn't even have to get bothered with a lot of interaction with it. We have a get software option. We're a Jamf shop, but we also understand Monkey, and then that's the LandRev logo, I believe. So if a user has any one of these three on their system, we will then show that as a Get Software option in the menu, right? Because otherwise we had the self-service logo down in the dock, but users only used it once a month, right? If you've seen some of the other presentations here, a lot of people are working on ways to do even more stuff automatically so a user doesn't have to go to that self-service portal. So we didn't want to take up dock space, but since we already had the screen real estate, we might as well use it. So again, if any of these are on your system, we'll show a Get Software button or menu item. Or, since everything is designed to be customizable, if you've got a URL or an app, you can specify that, and then when they go to Get Software, it'll launch that. Some places have talked about doing this for a ticketing system. You may have a system where people can request software that they don't already have, so you can launch that page if you wanted. A couple other fun options like that. We've got a Get Help option. We're a big Bomgar shop. It's a great screen sharing chat utility, but it's a real pain in the butt to set up in the first place and get the client down on the machine. So we put some back-end functionality to be able to download the Bomgar client and set it up. And while we were doing that, we said, well, it'd be really cool, since we know what the AD user is, if we could start putting in some variables. And that got us down a path which became even cooler, because if you use Bomgar, and I'll show you a screenshot of this, now I know exactly who's connecting, because it's not just the local username, which could be Fluffy Bunny 82, right? It's their AD username, it's their email address, it's the serial number of the machine. It's all of these things already authenticated and put into that Bomgar request. So now I get it logged in my files better. And when my agents get this incoming request, we've now got a link so it automatically opens up the machine in the JSS. It just makes the whole process a lot nicer. Now the great thing about this is once we figured out all this variable substitution, you can put in a URL. If you use a ticketing system, Zendesk, Jira, Fresh Ticket, Oz Ticket, whatever you want, we can actually pass these all in when you open up that ticket and fill out all this stuff for the user automatically. Right? So some really nice things that we wanted to put in here specifically for kind of help desk functionality. It's not a very pretty plist to write. I'll just let you know. But this, for example, is because you have to specify a user agent in there. This is the URL and then a couple of the custom settings that you're passing into there. And that will then set up a Bomgar download. Very similar functionality. If you were going to do your own URL, you can then, however you wanted to post it, put in all these other items in there. And this is on the webpage at nomad.menu, so you can go from there. But we have a couple of places that, like I said, are using it with web pages. Really nice. And then the Bomgar stuff I'll show you in a little bit. And this is an example. If you use Bomgar, you'll see that it came in from NoMAD, so you can filter it out maybe. The company, some other functionality. We found it to be really handy, because otherwise, a lot of times we don't know exactly who's calling us. So this just stops the 20 questions when we're interacting with the user. All right, so we're currently on 102. We'll chat about 103 in a little bit, but 1.1, we've got some big functions coming. Local admin passwords, we'll talk in a little bit. Keychain item updates. A couple of people had asked for when I changed my Active Directory password, NoMAD can already change my local password and update my keychain on my File Vault account. So that's all great. But what if I have an Exchange password or a link password or some other random app that I've never heard of password in my keychain? Can you do this as well? And so for 1.1, what we'll do when you put in that new password, we'll go through your keychain, find those items you tell us to, and we'll make sure those items have the new password as well. So if we do this right, the user will never get a, hey, your password's wrong, please type it in again, that they have to do right now when they do an AD password change. All right, so, and we're doing that all through the APIs, so everything stays in the keychain, we don't move anything out. That's in green because we've already got that code done. We'll have a 1.1 beta here, probably another week or two. DFS resolution when not bound. DFS gets a little funky as to finding the deep link for the SMB server in that DFS share. So we've got some clever ways, although I think we're going to have to write what amounts to an SMB client, which I'm slightly excited about, but I feel bad about being excited about that. So we may figure that out. Arbitrary share mounting, I'll show that to you in the demo here in a little bit, in that you can feed NoMAD a plist of all kinds of shares based upon group membership, and whether they're on the network or not, we will then mount those shares if you ask us to. So that's fun. 802.1x profile configuration. We can get the certificate for you now, but the next step is to bundle it all into a profile so that you can actually get it in and the user doesn't even have to think about it. The wireless just works. So one of the things we're working on, local admin. I got challenged by this at Mac Sysadmin in Gothenburg a couple months ago, that if you do move into a casual binding environment, one of the things you may lose is local admin accounts. All right. The nice thing about being in a directory service is that I could have a local user, or I could have a network user, a help desk user. They could log on, they could authenticate as an admin, do work, and then leave. All right. Or I could specify a local user to be an admin or not. What I showed off at JNUC, and I'd be really interested to work with somebody on, is kind of a multi-part system here that NoMAD could easily manage, where if you're a member of a particular group and NoMAD knows that, we will fire off an HTTP post to a web host of your choosing. You'd have to write this web host. We don't have that, but it'd just be a little simple API. Kerberos authenticated. If I can get to that web host, the web host fires a policy trigger to Jamf, Monkey, whoever you're using for your MDM management, which then pushes a configuration profile that would then make the local user an admin for 30 minutes. Or cycle a password, or there's a couple of different options there. But we think we've got some very clever ways here of making a non-admin account an admin based upon Active Directory membership that's really not exposed to the local system because they're not bound to AD. Does that make sense? It's a little bit of a route around. But this part with the configuration profile is actually very easy. Most of the MDM servers will already do this. Just push a configuration profile to make the user an admin, group membership change, or something like that. And this little part on the right side, that's just an HTML call where we're just looking up. If we can reach a host, then we have a valid Kerberos ticket. You can log that the action happened on that web host and then kick over a policy that hits that. All right. So for the most part, this is pretty easy for NoMAD because all I have to do is essentially a curl. The rest is going to be in your back-end solution. We're also working on a local only, so you wouldn't require any of this network infrastructure where we'd have a privileged root helper that NoMAD would be running in the background as a system launch daemon. And when you are a member of a particular group and you're already authenticated to AD, if you want to become an admin, we'll give you an option to say, make me an admin for 30 minutes. And then the root launch daemon will run a policy that will cycle the password or do whatever and allow you to be an admin for a little while. So that's some of the stuff coming in 1.1, which should be in the March timeframe. All right, demo time. So the code is all available online. It's all under an MIT license. You know, I can show you this, but we're about, that's not a great, because that's pretty short. Let me give you a long one. Here's the password change window. You know, all kinds of fun Swift. We're about 7,500 lines of Swift and a few hundred lines of Objective-C. I didn't think it was going to get that big, to tell you the truth. And we're growing. It's a bunch of different class files. We've tried to be pretty good about breaking everything out into individual classes because we've started using it in other places. And you're going to be the first ones to see we started localization. So what I want to do is show you the Swedish localization. Last night at the bar, there was a very nice gentleman from Finland who helped me with this. He said it was correct Swedish. Apologies to any Swedes in the room. So that was kind of funny, right?
The Ben Tom's part is not Swedish.
I will switch it back to English so I know what it actually is doing. We are localized in French and German right now. I have someone don't reboot. Right? Right? All right, good. I have someone working on a real Swedish translation. The translation is pretty easy, so if anybody's interested, we'd love the help. We've got 2 XML files that have about 30 different words and phrases in it, and then we adjust the UI accordingly. Some things were hard, like Kerberos ticket. I don't know how that translates into a number of different languages. I tried to do it in French through Google Translate, and that didn't work out so well. But yeah, it's a bunch of things like that, and then all the menu items and everything else will be localized. In this particular case, I'm using one of the preference keys to make it the caribou icon instead of the normal one. And first of all, I'll show you this, because you'll have NoMAD in its resting state. It used to say not connected, but that's a configurable option now, so you can put an emoji, for example, if you want, or whatever you need. Not connected took up a lot of screen space, and people were complaining about that. So this shows me that I'm not logged on, nor am I connected. If I fire up my VPN, NoMAD sees that. You see the flash for a little bit, and now it knows it's connected. And if I'm connected, I can come in and I can sign on. And by signing on, I'll get a little username password box here. We're now doing a Kerberos connection. NoMAD will refresh itself here shortly. And it says that I'm logged in, but my password's about to expire in less than a day. Right? And this is pretty much, what most people will use this for on a day-to-day basis. You've noticed the tooltip says that February 9th, so it's due to expire in a couple hours, I believe. And you can't see this because I'm running it out of Xcode, but if you go over here, I did get a user alert that my password is about to expire, because we do use the user notification center for that. So if you're running it in the standard binary, that would have come up on the window. Right. And that's, again, configurable as to how annoying you want that to be. Some functionality that we have in here, for example, I can go to Get Software. And in my case, I've just got it set up to chess, but that would launch whatever app or anything else that you wanted. I can sign out, I can change my password here, and this will do an Active Directory password change. Would also update my local password if I have it set to configure that, and some other functionality there. Other cool things, here's file servers. So we'll zoom in on this so you guys can see it easier. This is new to 1.1, so you can actually set up a preference file. And in this case, the home shares are automatically mounted, but file server 2 is an optional one. And if I click on this, I'll zoom out. And there you go. Files show up on the desktop there. So now I've got those file servers. So as an admin, you can push out a plist. I don't use file servers anymore, but I hear people still do. So you can push out a plist of all the file shares you may want to have easily accessible to a user, and it will show up right there in NoMAD. And then once it's mounted, if I hit that again, come on, let it update. There you go. Notice I got the check mark. That lets me know that it's mounted. And if I select it again, it should bring up the window for it. Finder maybe. Come on, Finder. I might have anchored it. There you go. So it pops up the window so you know that you can get to those files easy. And if I unmount it, eject. Come on. That's why I don't like file servers. There it goes. It's gone out of here on the sidebar. If I go back up here, let it refresh. See, we got to get a little faster about this. There it goes. Check mark is gone. All right. So that's the new functionality for the file servers. Here's Get Help. I can see who's on the desk right now. So if I scroll down, because eventually you'll see this bounce in the dock. There's the Bomgar client starting up. and then I'll have a connection to my help desk. All right, which if you're using BombGuard, this is pretty exciting, because otherwise you got to download, move it out of a DMG, double click it, do a whole lot of other stuff. But here I am, got a connection to the support rep. The other nice thing I like about this is since I can control this whole process, and you can too. There's Nick. I didn't tell Nick we were chatting, but we've done enough demos. Hello, Nick. How's Austin? Hopefully he won't say anything too profane. So we've got, this is an easy way to interact. The other nice thing I like, since I own this whole process, I can actually file a ticket on my behalf while I generate this chat, all right? Because I've got everything in there. So it just makes it that much simpler because I can do things. All right. Thanks for doing 86. Wow. Not that warm here. Close out. And so then we can do a screen share from there or whatever else like that. Yes, I do want to do all that. So I can take care of. Thank you. So cool. So that's the app in most of its functionality. Questions about NoMAD up at the top. We're going to make somebody run all the way up there.
Oh, start down here. Sorry, man. It's easy.
So you mentioned that you're dumping the groups to a P list, or you have that option.
Let me show you that.
But also, how often does that refresh? Like
Every 15 minutes, every time the network changes, every time you click on the menu, every time you launch it.
Okay, because I was thinking about that for like Active Directory group scoping, where you can't necessarily have your management tool talk to Active Directory for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. So, good question. So this is the actual P list. Some of these are things that as an admin you would set. Other things are, here's my keychain item. Mac Mule Secrets I was going to change. Other pieces, here's for example, all of the users that have logged in through this copy of NoMAD and the last password expiration date I have for them. So that's one thing you can pull from a script that you can look at that. And if I go up here to groups, this particular user isn't in any groups, but if I logged in as Kathy, you'd see those AD groups right there. And then you would know whether it's, your script, whatever else could interact with them in that fashion. All right. Some of these, for example, here, message not connected, that's the emoji we're using. Self-service app, application/chess.app. Some of these you set as an admin, some of these NoMAD sets, but then you would read in, the last user that's logged on is Bernie, a couple of things like that. Question up at the top?
We're currently having problems with Active Directory's fine-grained password policies in
Fully
Server
supported.
2012. That is fully supported.
Fully supported.
Yeah.
It would be really bad if we didn't fully support them. So for example, Bernie's on a fine-grained password policy, so he's only got a 4-day expiration. If I sign out as Bernie and log in as Kathy, I gotta remember Cassie's password. Well, if I logged in as somebody else, you would see that it was a different expiration. Because yes, starting with 2008, I think is when the fine-grained password policies came in, fully supported. Other questions? Oh, somebody dropped something.
Just wondering about local administrative access again.
Mm-hmm.
Just another scenario if you have an environment where the policy requires that there may not be local admin accounts that are generic in nature, like
Sure.
an IT admin account that everybody has the
Sure.
shared password for, and that in the past with bound machines, you would have just said mapped the domain admins or maybe created a Mac admins group, and
Mhm.
those people automatically get admin privileges locally. Since in this kind of scenario, you're not going to have those as local users,
Period.
and you're not bound. So have you thought about strategies maybe for
So-
adding something to
One
scope.
method was what we were talking about before, and we hope this is in 1.1, so the March timeframe, is that you could do a web call that would then do a pass over to Jamf, whatever else you're using for management, that would then make that current local user an admin for 30 minutes. And then the help desk person could do whatever they needed. It wouldn't be a whole separate account, but we'd be elevating that local user. The other method that we've been looking at is to have a generic account with a random password, right? Because part of the reasons for not wanting generic accounts is the passwords aren't random, and if they are random, you can't use them, and then there's security hole. So you would create an account with a random password. You wouldn't know, nobody would know what it is. But then when you wanted to use it, we'd have a local root agent that would be running that would then change that password, would re-randomize it for 30 minutes, and pop that up as a dialog box. So that way the user on the machine would then have an admin password for some period of time that they could do the work that they needed. And then when they were done, the password would get randomized again, and you'd be back to the original configuration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can sort of see how that might work. I'm thinking along the lines of actually, you have someone in the AD who is a domain admin. They want to be able to use authenticate using their account and existing password. Would you be able to maybe, using a similar kind of scheme, have it so that
So what
if
we
they
do,
could sort of authenticate first through NoMAD and then
Yep.
that
what we do offer right now, so right now I'm logged in as Bernie, and I can renew tickets, sign out, some other stuff. But if I hold down the Option key when I hit this menu, so a couple of things. First of all, I get when my ticket actually expires, and I get the domain controller that I'm connected to. All right? So those are kind of handy for troubleshooting. If I hold down Option and Control, I get the option to sign in again. So it doesn't remove the current user's Kerberos cache, but now I could sign in as an admin user. All right? Get a new ticket, be able to hit access, resources, whatever else. And then if I was local, then we could trigger something like elevating him to an admin or something like that.
I guess the idea I'm wondering about is like elevating the current user, but using the domain admin's credentials to make that possible.
And so what we would do is you'd sign in a second time here as the domain admin, and based upon a membership in a group in AD of that current user, we'd elevate the local user to an admin.
That sounds like a good option.
Yeah, I think we've worked out most of the flow, and it should be very simple that you still have an AD credential that's an admin, but then you've got access locally as an admin, and when you go away, it times out, expires, or something like that.
Cool, thanks.
No problems. Also, if you hold down Command Option, you can do a dump log, which will give you your entire user record out of AD and a bunch of other stuff in the logs. So just some fun stuff we've put in there. Other questions? Rich again.
So you mentioned the elevation of privileges. So is NoMAD running within user land?
In its current context, it's entirely in the user.
Okay.
All right. So if we were to do elevated privileges, we've either got to have an off-box MDM solution that's going to be able to do that for us, or we'd have a separate root launch daemon that would be running in the background.
Okay.
Those are the two options that we're looking at. We may do both.
You mentioned being able to set or tell it which applications to update passwords for. Is that something that is users set, or is that?
It's part of the P list. So in this particular example, since I was hoping to get it for a big demo, but it wasn't that exciting of a demo. You can feed it a list of keychain items. In this case, it's MacMule secrets. And if I open up keychain access and go to passwords, we would be editing this particular item because we're just looking at that name and we're matching it. So you can feed it this either through an admin, through a config profile, or via the user adding it themselves.
I don't think MyShot does any tokenized password like Google does, but I guess you wouldn't be able to handle a tokenized password.
Some of those obviously get a little harder because it's not as simple as just changing a plain text password in a keychain entry. And also I can show you the preferences window to give you an idea of how we try to keep it fairly simple. This is all the preferences that you have. And in the most cases, the only thing you really need to set is the Active Directory domain because we'll guess at the Kerberos domain for you. If you aren't a disjointed namespace, you can set it there as yourselves. As a administrator, you can force these. So if you actually force the preferences through an MDM solution, we'll actually gray all these out so that the users not only can't change them, they know they can't change them. And then you can specify, for example, if they use the keychain or not, things like that. Other,
Right. Do you have a sort of suggested workflow for integrating this with DEP so that you would ensure that the user is creating an account with a sensible username and password to begin with?
So I can't make them create an account with a sensible username, all right? Because that happens too early on, unless you have DEP automatically create the accounts, right? What we find in our environment, we do DEP authenticated, and then we make the first user a non-admin because we've already putting an admin user on. This is some of the new DEP stuff that you can do as of Sierra, right? So you can put an admin user on that's done under the covers. The user, when they go through MacBuddy, has to hit a password policy. So they have to make sure it's 8 characters, whatever else long. But then they can choose whatever name they want. I really don't care what their username is because I can pull from the P list what their AD account is. So that's why I'm not as concerned. If they want to be Fluffy Bunny 85, let them be Fluffy Bunny 85. Then deploy NoMAD with a launch agent. So the first time they log in, then NoMAD comes up. They can log in. At that point, you can synchronize their local password with their AD password if you want, because NoMAD will do that for them, and then you're off to the races.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I guess I was coming from the angle of trying to make it completely transparent to the user, so that I guess if NoMAD could just use the same credentials as they had already logged in as, but it sounds like the sensible thing to do is to be educating the user that there is this thing.
Yep.
Sign into this thing and you'll get all your domain resources, and we don't necessarily care what you do the rest of the time.
And it should be pretty simple because, I mean, you could create the keychain item for them if you knew what their password was, but that's probably a little bit sketchy. So they will have to sign in at least once to NoMAD. But if you have this use keychain box ticked, it'll save the password in the keychain, and every time then on, it'll try to use that first and automatically sign in. So then they hopefully will never have to get a dialog box again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions down in the front? Useful, right? Interesting. All right. Well, thank you. All right. Thank you. Good. Good. We're hitting the right place.
So, with the preference window there, you've got eng.nomad.test. If you had a user in that, could you set the domain as just nomad.test if you had different domains in a forest?
We're working on kind of that setup. We don't have, we know what a forest is, and we can find the right resources and find the sites and everything else like that in the forest. What we don't have right now is a real good UI for that. Because you're looking at, and I've got 2 or 3 domains within this forest, right? Nomad.test is one, sales.nomad.test is another one. Right now, we're kind of thinking of this in a laptop mobile user environment. You're probably only going to have one account that ever logs into NoMad. We have some people that are using it in labs right now, but that's not big. So you would set this for whatever the local user is, and then it would just be that. The next step, maybe in the 1.1 time frame, maybe a little bit later, would be to actually have a true multi-forest awareness, so that when you got the login window, you can either type in your full UPN, or you'd have a pull down for all the domains that are in that forest, because we could easily do that as well. So we're thinking about that, but we're not there yet.
Thanks.
So, anyone else? Ooh.
And I have another secret demo to show when we're done with this.
With complex password requirements, is there something that could indicate a user on what the password requirements are, so when they change the password?
You're not the first one to ask for that. So we don't know what the policy is, but what we plan on doing, and this will probably be out in 103, is when you do change password here, we're going to put a little question mark or something that would be the actual policy. And so as the admin, you can put whatever string you want in there. When they click on that, or maybe it's a button that says password policy, we're not entirely certain what the UI looks like yet. A sheet would come down so they would be reminded of what that is. Would that solve the problem?
So I've got two questions. One is, does it work with Azure AD?
Haven't tried it. Everything that I do is with an Azure instance, but I haven't actually used it with Azure AD, which is slightly different than just running DCs in Azure. So would love to hear if you've got that set up. We'd love to work with you to see if it does.
Cool. And the second one is, with your Bongo integration, are you able to set it so that you can choose which engineer you choose? So whoever's logged in, rather than...
You should be able to push that. We wouldn't have that in there now, but that wouldn't be hard to add, because it would just be another one of the data bits that you put into the curl to get down the BombGuard agent, and then BombGuard does the rest on the back end, I believe. So it shouldn't be hard. But no, we don't do that now. Other questions?
Anyone else?
Ben, who's now come back.
Yeah, Ben, welcome back. As a revenge, no one goes to screen free for Ben after lunch. I'm just saying.
Thank you. So, thanks for keeping my secrets protected out there.
Happy to help.
If you guys be looking at touch bar support to bring in nice little icons on there?
Very interested in the icons, and I'm even more interested in using the SEP on the new systems to generate the certificates. Because what I'll show you next, you're a great segue into doing some work with smart cards that we've been playing around with as well. So the next step on this is, so I've logged out of AD right here, so I don't have any tickets. It's offering me to sign in. We've got another app, just because we wanted to do this as a standalone. If I run this, this pops up. And it doesn't like it. There we go. Now it pops up. So here's a little, anybody using smart cards? Well, all right, so maybe this won't be as exciting as I thought. This is a YubiKey, which has an identity, right? Certificate pair on here. And I use the new crypto kit. So if I plug this in, there we go. So then I've got my identities that are on here. I can sign in as Bernie then. Put in my PIN for the token. You've got tickets. And then if I refresh NoMAD up here, it'll think about it for a second, and then it's going to go green because I've got the tickets. So there I've got my login again. And that's what I'd like to do with the fingerprint sensor on the Touch Bar Max. So that now you can get into AD, get your credentials without ever having to type your password, but still being a relatively secure environment. So instead of the PIN, you'd be pushing in your thumbprint. Or if you just have smart cards, we work with those on 1011, and this, I spent a lot of time figuring this out, but I'm really excited that we've got the keychain callbacks. So when I plug this in, it shows up, and when I pull it out, it goes away. I'm very happy about that. Just so there's a little bit there. So yeah, and that will probably be something, we'll roll that into NoMAD, although we may have a pro version, because I want to make sure that we actually have support for that. So that's the bonus demo, smart card support. You'll hear more in the next session. Mr. Purvis is doing a little bit. For 1.2 on NoMAD, we're kind of looking at SAML support and what that might look like. We know, just like I told you 10 years ago to bind to AD, now I'm telling you not to bind to AD. In 5 years, I'll probably tell you what's AD. As I think in the next couple of years, there's going to be a pretty marked departure from kind of on-prem directory services and moving to SAML, Okta, Duo, Ping, whatever else have you as directory single sign-on, cloud directory single sign-on options. And so we're kind of looking at what that looks like, making sure the menus are very modular. Not sure what else 1.2 might have. MIT license, we got community support, and we do have support contracts. A lot of people have asked us about these, and since we run a 24/7 help desk, it was pretty easy for us to set these up. So if you're like NoMAD, but you want to make sure that you've got somebody to ask questions about that actually is contractually obligated to respond, you have options. So that's been fun for us to figure out. Give you a little idea of the version history. We came up with the public beta in the September timeframe. December 21st is when we launched 1.0. A few minutes later, we had 1.01. Sometimes that happens. 1.02 came out on January 22nd. 1.03 we're mostly done with. It's just a little fit and polish stuff. And that should be released sometime in the end of February, so in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I've been posting, they're not quite nightlies, but they're close to the Slack channel that we have, which is NoMAD, appropriately enough, on the Mac admin Slack. So if you're interested in getting the latest and greatest or asking questions, you can go there. And then we're looking at maybe March for 1.1, where you'd have the file servers that I was showing you, some of the keychain stuff. Hopefully we get the DFS work done by then. That might be a little bit later, as we have to do a lot more work there. Here's where to go get it. Mac admins, org Slack, we're #NoMAD. NoMAD.menu is the main page. That's where you can do the download of the official public one. You can get a lot of our help information is there. Find out about support contracts. And then all the code, GitLab.com, /NoMAD. And I know it's not GitHub, so don't accidentally type GitHub. That won't get you anywhere. GitLab, all right? And they've recovered from their database issue. And no code was lost for us, at least. So it's good. So. Oh, Wyatt Caribou and who did the logo? The caribou is the most nomadic land animal. And it's not a moose. It's a caribou, I guess. And my graphic designer, who got way too excited about it. But no, it's a great looking one. And it's a shield, right? It's not that her head is mounted on a wall. No caribou were hurt in the development of this application. But it's carrying the caribou, keeping you safe. And we hope to have pins and other things and stickers and swag and other stuff as we're going through that. So, cool. Other questions?
I think that's it.
All right.
Cool. So,
Thank you very much.